The fluorescent hum of the airport lounge was a dull drone against the cacophony of hurried footsteps, muffled announcements, and the distant roar of jet engines. Terminal B was always a whirlwind, a nexus of departures and arrivals, of hellos and goodbyes. In a quiet corner, away from the main thoroughfare, sat Elias Thorne, a man whose 70-odd years had etched themselves onto his face like a cartographer, meticulous lines on an ancient map. His eyes, though faded by time, still held a piercing intensity, a distant echo of battles fought and comrades lost. He wasn't much to look at, not to the casual observer. A worn denim jacket, a faded baseball cap pulled low, and a pair of scuffed work boots. He blended into the background, another anonymous traveler in a sea of faces. But for those who knew how to look, there were subtle tells. The way he held himself, a quiet alertness despite his relaxed posture, the faint, almost imperceptible tremor in his left hand, and the tattoo. It was on his right forearm, peeking out from beneath the cuff of his jacket sleeve. Not a sprawling, colorful sleeve, but a simple, stark design, a stylized, almost geometric representation of a broken compass rose, with a single, jagged line cutting through its center, pointing nowhere. Below it, in a script so fine it was barely legible from a distance, were 3 numbers, 2 to 4, 7. Elias was nursing a lukewarm coffee, his gaze fixed on the endless stream of humanity passing by. He wasn't waiting for anyone, just waiting for his flight to a quiet town in the Pacific Northwest, a place where the rain was constant and the memories could sometimes be drowned out by the drumming on the roof. Suddenly, the quiet corner was invaded. A boisterous group of young men, fresh-faced and brimming with an almost aggressive energy, strode into the lounge. Their crisp Marine Corps uniforms were immaculate. Their boots shined to a mirror sheen, reflecting the overhead lights. They were loud, confident, and undeniably proud, as they should be. Elias felt a familiar pang, a mix of pride for their service and a wistful ache for his own youth, long since vanished in the dust of distant lands. They settled into a cluster of chairs not far from him, their laughter echoing a little too loudly in the otherwise subdued space. One of them, a strapping young corporal with a neatly trimmed fade and a swagger in his step, caught Elias's eye. The corporal's gaze lingered on Elias's exposed forearm, specifically on the tattoo. "Hey, check it out, fellas!" The corporal, whose name tag read Miller, nudged his buddy, a lanky private first class. "Looks like Gramps here got some ink." The private first class, a grin splitting his face, leaned in. "Oh yeah? What's that, sir? A faded tribal from the 90s? He chuckled, and his companions joined in, a ripple of easy, youthful derision. Elias didn't flinch. He'd faced worse than a few disrespectful kids. He just took another sip of his coffee, his gaze still distant. Miller, emboldened by his buddy's reaction, took a step closer. "No offense, old-timer, but what is that? Some kind of broken target practice?" He gestured vaguely at the compass rose. "And what's with the numbers? Your lucky lottery picks?" He laughed, a short, sharp bark. "It's just a tattoo, right?" The words hung in the air, light and dismissive. Yet they struck a chord within Elias that vibrated with decades of unspoken history. Just a tattoo. To them, perhaps. To him, it was a scar, a prayer, a monument. Elias slowly lowered his coffee cup, his movements deliberate. He turned his head, his eyes, those ancient knowing eyes, finally settling on Corporal Miller. The laughter died in the young Marine's throat. There was something in Elias's gaze, a depth, a quiet intensity that made Miller's confident smirk falter. "You're right, son," Elias said, his voice a low rumble, surprisingly clear. "It is just a tattoo." He paused, letting the silence stretch, letting the young Marines feel the weight of his unspoken words. "Unless you know the code." The air in the lounge seemed to thicken. The other Marines, sensing a shift, quieted down, their youthful bravado replaced by a flicker of curiosity, perhaps even unease. "The code?" Miller stammered, his earlier confidence completely gone. Elias slowly pushed up the sleeve of his jacket, fully revealing the tattoo. The broken compass rose, the jagged line, and the numbers 247 were now clearly visible. He then extended his arm slightly, turning it so the young Marines could get a better look. "This," Elias began, his voice gaining a quiet power, "is the broken compass of Khe-Sanh." The words hit the young Marines like a physical blow. Khe-Sanh. The name alone was legendary. A brutal, prolonged siege during the Vietnam War, a crucible of courage and unimaginable sacrifice. It was a name whispered in hushed tones in Marine Corps history classes, a symbol of endurance against overwhelming odds. Corporal Miller's eyes widened, his face paling slightly. He knew Khe-Sanh. Every Marine knew Khe-Sanh. But the broken compass? That wasn't in any textbook. "And these numbers," Elias continued, his finger tracing the faint digits. 247. They represent the 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines, 7th Platoon, my platoon. Silence. Profound, absolute silence. The airport noise faded into the background. The young Marines stood transfixed, their earlier arrogance replaced by a dawning comprehension, a sudden, stark realization of the history standing before them. The 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines, the magnificent bastards, a unit with a fearsome reputation, particularly during the Vietnam War. And the 7th Platoon. "Sir," Private First Class Morales, the lanky Marine who had joked about the tribal tattoo, was the first to speak, his voice barely a whisper, laced with genuine awe. "The 7th Platoon. They were the ones who held the western perimeter during the Tet Offensive push, weren't they?" Elias nodded, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. "They were, for 77 days, 3 minutes. That's all it took. 3 minutes from the casual, dismissive laughter to the chilling realization. The young Marines, suddenly, weren't just seeing an old man with a tattoo. They were seeing history. They were seeing a living legend. Corporal Miller, his face now etched with profound respect, straightened his posture. His eyes, fixed on Elias's tattoo, seemed to see beyond the ink, into the very soul of the man. He saw the dust of Vietnam, the mud of the trenches, the faces of fallen comrades. He saw the unwavering resolve that defined a generation. Without a word, almost as if on an unspoken command, Corporal Miller snapped to attention. His heels clicked together, his back ramrod straight. His right hand rose, a crisp, perfect salute. Then, Private First Class Morales, his eyes shining with a newfound reverence, followed suit. And then the next Marine, and the next, until all 5 young, proud Marines stood in a perfect line, facing Elias Thorne, their hands raised in a silent, powerful salute. The sight was breathtaking. Other travelers in the lounge, initially oblivious, now paused, drawn by the sudden, solemn tableau. They didn't know the code, didn't know Khe-Sanh or the 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines, but they understood the raw, visceral respect emanating from the young men in uniform. Elias Thorne, the old veteran, stood slowly, his movements stiff but deliberate. He looked at the young Marines, his eyes softening. He didn't return the salute immediately. Instead, he took a moment, letting the weight of the moment settle, letting the connection between generations of warriors solidify. Then, with a quiet dignity, he raised his own hand, a slightly slower, perhaps less crisp, but no less heartfelt salute. The memory of Khe-Sanh was a tapestry woven from dust, blood, and the relentless thrum of incoming artillery. Elias Thorne had arrived in Vietnam in 1967, a fresh-faced 20-year-old from a small farm town in Iowa, eager to serve, naive to the horrors that awaited him. He was assigned to the 7th Platoon, 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines, a unit that would soon become his family, his crucible, and his enduring legacy. The tattoo, the broken compass, wasn't something he got in a parlor. It was a crude, painful etching done by a medic named Doc Riley, a gentle giant with surprisingly steady hands, using a needle fashioned from a guitar string and ink made from gunpowder and water. It was done in the belly of a bunker, deep underground, amidst the constant barrage of North Vietnamese shells. The broken compass symbolized the disorientation, the utter chaos of Khe Sanh. They were surrounded, cut off, bombarded relentlessly. Maps became useless, directions blurred. Their world shrank to the perimeter, to the foxhole, to the faces of the men beside them. The jagged line through the center represented the constant threat, the breaking of their world, but also the unbreakable spirit that held them together. The numbers, 247, were their identity, their bond, their silent promise to each other. Elias remembered the day they decided on it. It was after a particularly brutal assault on the western perimeter, the very section they were tasked with holding. The ground was churned earth, littered with shrapnel and the grim reminders of combat. They had lost good men that day. Morale was low, exhaustion was a constant companion, and fear gnawed at the edges of every thought. Sergeant Mac McMillan, their platoon sergeant, a grizzled veteran of Korea, had gathered them in the relative safety of their bunker. "Look around, fellas," he'd said, his voice hoarse. "We're lost in this hell, aren't we? Like a compass spinning out of control." He'd picked up a piece of a broken compass. Its needle snapped. "But we ain't broken. Not yet. We got each other. And that's all the direction we need." It was then that Doc Riley, always the quiet observer, suggested the tattoo, a symbol of their shared experience, their unbreakable bond in a broken world. Something only they would understand. A code. Elias remembered Private Jimmy Smiles O'Connell, a kid who looked barely old enough to shave, volunteering to go first. Smiles was always cracking jokes, even when the shells were falling. He died 2 weeks later, taking a direct hit during a mortar attack, his laughter silenced forever. Elias had seen the tattoo on Smiles's arm, a stark reminder of their shared fate, a silent promise that he would carry their story. The 77 days of the siege were a blur of terror, boredom, and fleeting moments of camaraderie. They ate sea rations, slept in shifts, and fought with a ferocity born of desperation. They watched their friends fall, one by one, their numbers dwindling. Elias carried the weight of every loss, every near miss, every scream in the night. He saw things no man should ever see, did things no man should ever have to do. The broken compass became more than just a tattoo. It was a map of their suffering, a testament to their resilience, a silent roll call of the fallen. When the siege finally lifted and the remaining men of the 7th Platoon were extracted, they were shadows of their former selves, but they carried the compass, etched onto their skin and seared into their souls. Back in the airport lounge, the silence stretched, broken only by the distant sounds of the terminal. Elias Thorne, his hand still raised in salute, felt the familiar ache in his old bones, but also a warmth spreading through his chest. It wasn't pity he saw in the young Marine's eyes, but something far more valuable: recognition. Corporal Miller was the first to lower his hand, slowly, respectfully. "Sir," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "it's an honor. We didn't know." His face was flushed, a mixture of shame and awe. Elias nodded. "How could you? It's not in the history books. It's in the dirt, in the blood, in the memories of men like me." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the young faces. "But you know it now." Private First Class Morales stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the tattoo. "The Western Perimeter. They said it was impossible to hold, but the 7th Platoon, they did it." "We did," Elias confirmed. a ghost of a smile touching his lips. We held it for the men behind us, for the country we believed in. Another Marine, a quiet one named Garcia, spoke up. "My grandfather was in Vietnam, sir. He never talked about it much. Just said he was in the thick of it." He looked at Elias with newfound understanding. "I think he might have known men like you." Elias's gaze softened further. "He probably did, son. We were all in it together, one way or another." The moment lingered, a silent bridge spanning generations. The young Marines, so full of youthful arrogance just minutes before, were now humbled, their understanding of service and sacrifice deepened by this unexpected encounter. They had been taught history in classrooms, but Elias Thorne had lived it. "Sir," Corporal Miller finally said, his voice firm, "thank you for your service, for your sacrifice, and for sharing your story." Elias simply nodded. He didn't need elaborate thanks. The salute, the recognition in their eyes, was more than enough. It was a silent acknowledgement that the code, the meaning of the broken compass, had been understood. The torch, in a small, significant way, had been passed. As the boarding announcement for Elias's flight echoed through the terminal, he offered a final, small nod to the Marines. "Keep safe, boys," he said, his voice raspy. "And remember what you're fighting for." He picked up his worn duffel bag, the weight of it familiar in his hand, and began to walk towards the gate. The young Marines watched him go, their perfect line holding, their salutes still crisp in the air, long after Elias Thorne, the old veteran with the broken compass tattoo, had disappeared into the bustling crowd. They would never forget the old man, the tattoo, or the code. And they would carry that lesson with them into their own service, into their own battles, a silent reminder that some stories, some sacrifices were etched not just in history books, but in the very souls of those who lived them. The airport continued its relentless rhythm, but for 5 young Marines, something had fundamentally shifted. The casual laughter, the dismissive comments, they were gone, replaced by a profound respect that would stay with them long after their uniforms were put away. They had seen the code, and in that moment, they had seen the true meaning of being a Marine. And they had lined.